There's a kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. You know the kind. It's not in your body exactly, or not only in your body. It's something deeper. A heaviness that follows you into your most ordinary moments. A sense that some part of you has been working very, very hard for a very long time, and is running out of steam. In internal family systems therapy, one of the most transformative and widely researched approaches in modern psychology, there's a word for what that part of you is carrying. It's called a burden. And the reason that word matters, the reason it changes things when people first hear it applied to their own experience, is because it shifts the frame entirely. It stops asking, "What is wrong with me?" And it starts asking, "What has this part of me been carrying? And how long has it been carrying it alone?" Today we're going deep into one of the most clinically rich and personally resonant concepts in IFS, the burdens that our parts hold. We're going to talk about what burdens are, how they form, how they show up differently across the three main types of protective parts, exiles, managers, and firefighters, and what the process of releasing a burden actually looks like. Whether you're brand new to IFS or you've been in parts work for years, I think this video is going to give you language for something you've already felt. And if you want a structured worksheet to take this exploration further, mapping the specific burdens your own parts are carrying, that resource is linked in the description. Let's start with a quick orientation, and then we'll go somewhere real. Section 1. A quick IFS orientation. Internal family systems was developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz, a family therapist who noticed in the 1980s that his clients consistently described their inner lives in terms of distinct voices, parts, or subpersonalities, and that these parts behaved relationally, almost like members of a family system. He stopped trying to talk his clients out of this experience and started working with it. What emerged over the next 4 decades became one of the most clinically sophisticated and humanistically grounded models in psychotherapy. The foundational premise of IFS is that the mind is naturally multiple, that we are all made up of many parts, and that this is not pathology. It is human. We have all had the experience of feeling torn, of wanting two contradictory things at once, of knowing what we should do and doing the opposite, of one voice in us saying yes and another saying absolutely not. IFS says these are not metaphors. These are parts, distinct aspects of our inner system, each with its own perspective, its own role, its own emotional reality, and its own history. At the center of the IFS model is what Schwartz calls the self, with a capital S. The self is not a part. It is the core of who you are beneath the parts, the seat of consciousness, compassion, curiosity, and clarity. The self is inherently whole and unbroken. It cannot be damaged by trauma. It can, however, become buried under the weight of parts that have taken on extreme roles in order to protect the system. IFS organizes parts into 3 broad categories based on the roles they play. Exiles are the young, vulnerable parts that carry the emotional wounds of the past, the pain, the shame, the grief, the fear. Managers are the protective parts that work proactively to keep the system safe, controlling, planning, achieving, perfecting, caretaking, doing whatever it takes to prevent the exile's pain from surfacing. And firefighters are the reactive protective parts that mobilize when the exile's pain breaks through anyway, using urgent, often impulsive strategies to extinguish the emotional fire as quickly as possible. All 3 part types carry burdens. And understanding what those burdens are, and where they came from, is the heart of what we're exploring today. Section 2. What are burdens in IFS? In IFS, a burden is defined as an extreme belief, emotion, or energy that a part took on as a result of a painful experience, typically in childhood, that was not properly witnessed, processed, or resolved at the time. Here's how to understand this concretely. When something overwhelming happens to a child, abuse, neglect, abandonment, humiliation, chronic criticism, a terrifying event, the child system needs to make sense of it. Children are egocentric not out of selfishness but out of developmental necessity. They organize their experience around themselves. So when bad things happen, the child system doesn't conclude that the world is random or that the adults around them are limited. It concludes something about the child. Something went wrong, and it must mean something about who I am. I am too much. I am not enough. I am unlovable. I am dangerous. I am the reason this happened. I am bad. These conclusions, these extreme beliefs about the self, are what IFS calls burdens. They are not the child's truth. They are the wound's truth. They are what the system decided in order to survive an experience it didn't have the resources to integrate. And because they were never properly processed, they don't update. They don't age. They stay exactly as raw, as absolute, and as present as they were the moment they formed. The other important thing to understand about burdens is that they are not only cognitive. They are not just thoughts or beliefs. They are often experienced as physical sensations: weight, tightness, coldness, emptiness, heaviness. Hearts that carry burdens often describe them through somatic metaphors: a stone in the chest, a darkness behind the eyes, a shrinking in the body. This is not accidental. The burden is held in the body as much as in the mind. And perhaps most importantly, parts do not choose their burdens. A part that carries shame did not decide to be ashamed. It took on shame because shame was what the environment delivered, and carrying it was the only way to make sense of an experience that otherwise made no sense at all. This is why IFS practitioners meet parts with curiosity and compassion rather than confrontation. The part doing the most damage is almost always the part carrying the most pain. Understanding the burden changes the response, from frustration or judgment to something much closer to grief. Section 3. Exile burdens. What gets locked away? Exiles are the most vulnerable parts in the IFS system. They are typically young, often formed in childhood or early adolescence, and they carry the raw, unprocessed emotional material of painful experiences. They are called exiles because the system, in its effort to function and survive, has pushed them away, hidden them, locked them behind walls of protection so their pain doesn't flood everything. The burdens exiles carry are the oldest and deepest ones in the system. They are the original wounds. Shame is the most common exile burden, and perhaps the most corrosive. Not guilt, which is about behavior: I did something bad. Shame is about identity: I am bad. I am fundamentally, irreparably wrong at the level of my being. The exile that carries this burden doesn't experience shame as a feeling that comes and goes. It experiences shame as a fact, as the truth of what it is. Worthlessness is closely related: the exile's conviction that it has no inherent value, that it must earn its right to exist through performance or perfection or service, that without those things it would simply not deserve to take up space. This burden often develops in environments where love was conditional, where approval was given for achievement and withheld for need, or where the child's emotional world was consistently minimized or dismissed. Abandonment is another exile burden that runs extraordinarily deep. The terror of being left, of being too much, or not enough, or simply forgotten, that formed in the context of actual loss, inconsistent caregiving, or emotional unavailability. The exile carrying this burden doesn't just remember being abandoned. It expects it. It waits for it. It organizes the entire inner world around preventing it from happening again. Fear and helplessness, often exile burdens too, the frozen, overwhelmed experience of a child who faced something threatening without any adult support or protection. The exile that carries this is not simply afraid. It is afraid in the way a child is afraid, absolutely, without context, without the certainty that it will end. Grief lives in exiles as well, the grief of what was lost, what was never given, what was taken. Griefs that were not witnessed or held often become exile burdens because the environment communicated, implicitly or explicitly, that the grief was too much, too long, too inconvenient. The exile learned to carry it alone. And self-blame, perhaps the most heartbreaking exile burden of all. The young part that decided, in order to preserve some sense of control in an uncontrollable situation, that what happened must have been its fault. Because if it was my fault, maybe I can prevent it from happening again. If it was my fault, there is still an order to the world. Self-blame in an exile is not irrationality. It's the logic of a child trying desperately to make sense of something that made no sense. These exiles are not locked away because the system is cruel. They are locked away because their pain is so intense, so unregulated, and so activating that the system decided, at some point, that the only way to keep functioning was to keep them contained. The managers took over that job. Section 4. Manager burdens. The cost of keeping control. Managers are the parts that run the day-to-day operations of your inner life. They are proactive protectors. Their entire job is to keep the system safe, functional, and socially acceptable, and above all to make sure the exiles never get activated. They are often the parts you most identify with, because they have been in the driver's seat for so long that their voice feels like yours. Managers can look like enormous strengths on the outside: high achievement, meticulous organization, relentless self-improvement, attentiveness to others' needs. And they often are genuinely capable. But they carry their own burdens, and those burdens have a cost. The burden of hypervigilance is one of the most exhausting manager burdens. This is the part that is always scanning, for threat, for disapproval, for the first sign that something is about to go wrong. It reads the room constantly. It monitors tone of voice, facial expressions, silences in a conversation. It cannot rest, because resting means something might slip through. The hypervigilant manager doesn't carry this burden because it enjoys it. It carries it because at some point, vigilance was the only thing that kept the system safe, and it never got the message that the danger has passed. Perfectionism is another manager burden, the belief that if everything is done well enough, controlled enough, presented carefully enough, the exile's shame or worthlessness will never be exposed. The perfectionist manager is not simply high standards. It is terrified. Underneath the drive is the conviction that being ordinary, making mistakes, or being truly seen would be catastrophic. The performance is protection. The people-pleasing burden is one of the most socially rewarded and personally costly manager patterns. The part that learned early that its own needs were dangerous, that having needs led to rejection, anger, or withdrawal, and adapted by becoming exquisitely attuned to the needs of others instead. This manager is often described as kind, giving, easy to be around. And it is. But the burden it carries is the belief that its own needs do not matter, or that expressing them is a form of aggression. It gives compulsively, not freely. Inner criticism is a manager burden that can be among the most self-attacking parts in the system. The inner critic is often trying, in its own extreme way, to protect. If I criticize myself first and harshly enough, maybe no one else will. If I hold myself to an impossible standard, maybe I'll never give the exile a reason to feel shame again. The critic is not the enemy. But it is exhausted. And so is the person listening to it. Control burdens show up in managers as the need to manage uncertainty through overplanning, rigidity, difficulty delegating, and deep discomfort with the unpredictable. The controlling manager learned that unpredictability was dangerous, that when things were out of order, bad things happened, and it has been maintaining order ever since, at whatever relational or personal cost that requires. What all of these manager burdens share is this: they are labor-intensive. They require constant effort to maintain. They are not who the person fundamentally is, they are strategies developed in response to what the person had to survive. And they take an enormous toll on the parts forced to carry them, often for decades. Section 5. Firefighter burdens, when relief becomes its own problem. Firefighters are the reactive protectors, the parts that mobilize when a manager's defenses fail and an exile's pain starts to break through. Where managers work to prevent the fire, firefighters work to put it out. And like real firefighters in an emergency, they are not concerned with collateral damage. They are concerned with one thing: stop the pain. Now, firefighter strategies are often the behaviors that bring the most shame and the most confusion, because they work. They genuinely work, in the short term, to reduce emotional pain. They just tend to create new problems in the process. The burden of compulsive relief seeking is at the heart of most firefighter behavior. This is the conviction, held at a visceral, preconscious level, that the emotional pain is unendurable, that it must be stopped immediately, and that any available means of stopping it is justified. The firefighter doesn't weigh options. It acts. And the urgency with which it acts is directly proportional to the intensity of the exile's pain. Substance use is perhaps the most widely recognized firefighter strategy. Alcohol, drugs, and other substances offer rapid, reliable relief from emotional pain. They quiet the exile, bypass the manager's vigilance, and deliver a neurochemical reset that the system desperately wants. The part driving the use is not broken or morally compromised. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do, finding the fastest available exit from unbearable feeling. The burden it carries is the desperation of a system that has no other way it knows to get relief. Dissociation and numbing are firefighter strategies for the parts that learn to put distance between the self and emotional experience when the experience became too intense. Zoning out, emotional flatness, the sense of watching yourself from outside, these are not character defects. They are the nervous system's emergency off switch, deployed by a firefighter part that learned this was the safest way to survive overwhelming states. Rage is a firefighter burden worth naming carefully, because it is often misunderstood. The part that responds to emotional pain with explosive anger is often protecting an exile carrying profound vulnerability. Rage puts walls up. It creates distance. It transforms helplessness into power, even if only for a moment. The firefighter carrying the rage burden is not fundamentally angry. It is fundamentally afraid, and rage is what it reached for when fear became unlivable. Other firefighter burdens include compulsive eating or restriction, self-harm, excessive risk-taking, compulsive sexuality, spending, overworking, and any other behavior that is driven by urgency and relief, rather than by genuine desire or choice. The defining quality of a firefighter burden is not the behavior itself but the function it serves: immediate escape from exile pain that has broken through the manager's defenses. Firefighter parts are often the most judged, by the person themselves, by others, sometimes by therapists who focus on the behavior without understanding the burden behind it. IFS asks us to look underneath. Not to excuse harm, but to understand that the firefighter is not the problem. The firefighter is the response to the problem. And the response will not change until the underlying burden is addressed. Section 6. The unburdening process. Here is the most important thing to understand about burdens in IFS: they are not permanent. They are not who your parts are. They are what your parts are carrying. And they can be released. This is the heart of what makes IFS not just an explanatory model but a healing one. The goal is not simply to understand why your parts behave the way they do, though that understanding alone is often profoundly relieving. The goal is to go back for the parts that have been carrying these burdens alone, sometimes for decades, and offer them something different. The unburdening process in IFS unfolds in several steps, and it requires that the person be grounded in self-energy, in the compassionate, curious, present awareness that sits beneath the parts, before attempting to work directly with an exile. This is why IFS therapy doesn't rush toward the wounds. It builds the relationship with the protective parts first. It earns trust. It asks the managers and firefighters to step back, not to abandon their posts, but to allow the self to do what they have been trying to do all along: actually help. When the time is right and the system has enough trust and stability, the therapist guides the client to find the exile, to locate it, witness it, acknowledge what it experienced, and express what it has never been able to express. This is the witnessing step, and it is often profoundly moving. Many exiles have never been acknowledged. They have been contained, managed, suppressed, medicated, shamed into silence. To be truly seen, by the person's own self, is itself therapeutic. After witnessing comes retrieval, the symbolic act of bringing the exile out of the past and into the present, where it can finally be safe. And then the unburdening itself, with the support of the self and often in the presence of some larger healing energy, nature, light, water, spirit, whatever resonates for the person, the part is invited to release the burden it has been carrying. To let it go. To give it back to wherever burdens go. What remains after unburdening is a part in its natural, unburdened state, and IFS says that every part, without its burden, has a quality to offer. The exile that carried shame often transforms into a part capable of profound humility and authentic connection. The exile that carried worthlessness becomes the part that holds genuine self-worth. The part is not erased. It is restored to what it was always meant to be before it was asked to carry something that was never its to carry in the first place. The managers and firefighters, in turn, can gradually relax their extreme roles when the exiles they were protecting are finally safe. The hypervigilant manager can learn to rest. The perfectionist can discover what it actually enjoys. The firefighter doesn't have to respond to emergencies that no longer exist. This is not a quick process. It is not linear. And it is not something to attempt without proper support, especially when working with significant trauma. But it is possible. And for people who have spent their whole lives feeling like something was fundamentally broken in them, the realization that it was never them, it was the burden, is one of the most liberating things they will ever encounter. You are not your burdens. Your parts are not their burdens. The shame, the fear, the exhaustion, the relentless drive, the desperate reach for relief, none of that is the truth of who you are at your core. It is what got layered on top of who you are, by experiences that asked too much of a system that was doing its absolute best. And somewhere inside, beneath all of it, there is a self that has been waiting, patiently, without judgment, to go back for every part that was left behind and bring it home. If this landed for you, if some part of you recognized itself in what we talked about today, I made a worksheet specifically designed to help you map the burdens your own parts are carrying. It walks you through exile burdens, manager burdens, and firefighter burdens with guided reflection prompts for each, so you can begin to name what's been carried and by whom. The link is in the description. This is the kind of work that changes things. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are not broken. And I'll see you in the next one.